I'm Sally Sansom. I'm a very soon going to be submitting my DPhil in health economics at the Health Economics Research Centre up the hill, and I'm also a junior research fellow here at the CPM. So as Susie mentioned, I'm going to be talking about patient and caregiver reported outcomes from genome sequencing for rare disease diagnosis. But I thought I'd just start with some background. So as you may or may not be aware, rare diseases are conditions that are individually rare but collectively affect approximately 6% of the population. And so these conditions are associated with significant morbidity and mortality, yet obtaining a diagnosis can take several years, and a large proportion of all people with a rare disease still remain undiagnosed. So this is really important because without a diagnosis, many people with a rare disease face barriers to accessing clinical trials, treatments, and other sort of clinical management strategies and other supports. So thankfully, genome sequencing is changing this paradigm, and it's doing so by increasing the likelihood and the speed of a diagnosis. So genome sequencing is an advanced technology that allows us to sequence most of a person's genome simultaneously and relatively quickly. And this differs from other screening and diagnostic technologies, including single gene testing, because it represents a shift away from asking a very specific question of a specific gene to interrogating quite a significant proportion of the genome. And so because of this, genome sequencing can produce a really vast number of results, and these can vary greatly in terms of their characteristics and uncertainty. Some of the sort of the domains in which they can vary are listed on the slide. So as a result of this, the information that's uncovered by genome sequencing is really complex, and it can have both positive and negative impacts on both patients and their caregivers. So these impacts have been demonstrated to span clinical, emotional, cognitive, behavioural and social domains. And it's hypothesized that these sort of more personal utility related factors exist on a continuum with factors more related to clinical utility, and that together these contribute to patient and caregiver quality of life. And sorry for the formatting, there was a slide merge issue. So the study I'm going to present on today is part of my DPhil, and this particular study aimed to evaluate the relevance and comprehensiveness of the outcomes model that I showed on the previous slide, as well as to understand how participant expectations and experiences of genome sequencing change over time, and also to get a sense of their preferences for different types of outcomes. So I recruited adults undergoing genome sequencing for rare disease diagnosis, as well as their caregivers, and then caregivers of children. And participant identification and referral was very thankfully facilitated by genomic practitioners and research nurses working within the GMS in Oxford, Birmingham and Southampton, so the Central and South region. Participants in my study were asked to complete surveys at baseline, 6 months and 12 months, and I also interviewed a subset of those. So in total, 324 participants have been recruited and completed the baseline survey, which is slightly over my target. I conducted 30 qualitative interviews. Almost 70% of participants completed the 6-month follow-up survey, and it looks like about 60% are going to complete the 12-month follow-up survey, which is underway. So again, sorry for the formatting issues, but the disease areas of the adults and children undergoing sequencing are really, that I've recruited are really quite varied. But as you can see, the majority have a sort of neurological, developmental, or I can't say this word, eye-related condition. And as you can see, the majority of participants had not received their results at baseline. And so this is really important for some of the other questions that I'm exploring, which are more related to sort of the psychometrics and measurement properties of outcome measurement instruments. So of the participants who had not received their results and were had indicated that they were seeking a diagnosis, the majority had been looking for a diagnosis for less than 1 year, which I suppose is a positive reflection that these patients are accessing the GMS within this time frame. But still, for others, they had been looking for much longer than this, with some seeking a diagnosis for over 10 years. Looking to the right-hand side of the slide, of participants who had received their results, almost half received a confirmed genetic diagnosis. But this number is very quickly followed by the proportion who received a result with no significant findings. So now getting into some of the media results, the first thing that I looked at was the relevance and comprehensiveness of the outcomes model, which had been developed by other researchers in other settings. And so what I found was that this was mostly relevant and comprehensive. There were some areas of the model that were not as relevant in this context, and perhaps were more relevant to sort of oncology-related sequencing, or other social settings where perhaps religion is more of a greater focus, for example. And this phenomenon has been observed by others, so that was good to find as well. I'm just trying to see my notes. So the most interesting thing that I found in this context was the relevance of including a physical domain and a subdomain related to symptoms and functioning. So this was informed by both the interviews and the survey results. And as you can see here, quite a large proportion of baseline survey respondents indicated that they were, hoping for a treatment or an improvement in clinical management, and then corresponding improvements in symptoms and functioning and quality of life. However, when I interviewed participants, although many were sort of hoping for these changes, a number were, quite realistic as to how likely it was that these outcomes would be achieved, but still sort of recognizing that this was an important, motivator for them was something that I felt was important to reflect in an outcomes model. And really this aligns with best practice. So even though a change, may not likely to occur, it's still important to reflect that. And so you can see here a really impactful quote from the mother of an adult adult child who has a quite severe developmental condition, and really speaking about how she hopes that ideally sequencing would lead to something that could help to take away her pain, and that if this is done, really her general sort of quality of life would improve. So now thinking about how the impact of the test and the results changes for participants over time. So through my analysis, I found that really people spoke about this change over time in three sort of groupings. So firstly, the impact of the test. Participants commonly describe sort of feelings of anxiety and worry as they prepared to undergo sequencing and as they waited for their results. But this wasn't uniform across all participants, many sort of reporting that they felt relatively neutral, and with others saying that they expected to sort of feel increasingly hopeful as the time neared for their results. And so as you can see here, it's just a long wait and I'm worried what they will find. Then thinking about the impact of results. So in the majority, participants reported feeling, initially quite shocked or upset upon receiving their results, regardless of the result type. But many participants describe that these responses sort of, abated over time as they accepted their results, and slowly these were replaced with feelings of relief and acceptance. So this experience was described by two participants as somewhat of a roller coaster of emotions. And additionally, some participants described interpreting the impact of their child's results through the lens of what they were hoping for. So if a family was seeking a diagnosis and that was what they obtained, then even though that was, quite upsetting news, that, it was what they were hoping for. And so there were feelings of relief associated with that. Conversely, if a family was seeking, to reassurance that perhaps it wasn't a genetic condition and may not have been passed on to other children or grandchildren, then interpreting sort of the findings of a genetic condition could be quite different. And then really interestingly, and not what I was expecting, a number of participants described being impacted by aspects of the GMS process itself. So many reported experiencing long wait times between providing their sample and receiving their results. Others reported feeling a lot of anxiety, stress, and frustration at the method by which they received their results in particular. So some of these participants reported receiving a letter describing their results, but then needing to wait a really long time, a number of months before being able to speak to someone about what those results meant. And so I've kind of think of this as sort of post-result but pre-understanding. So they know the variant, but they don't really know what that means for them or their families and their future. By contrast, one participant described their experience of having their result appointment brought forward. And so while they were happy to receive the information earlier, they worried that, what did this mean? Was it, a reflection that maybe their condition was, more acute or terminal than they had anticipated? And so now thinking about sort of the relative importance of outcomes, and as health economists, this is something that we're really interested in. What are people willing to sort of trade off, and what are the sort of outcomes that are considered to be most important? So participants highlighted a really wide range of overlapping outcomes, and it was really linked with, again, what they were hoping to get out of the test. Some of the really common themes were providing information for family members, whether through cascade testing or informing sort of future reproductive decisions, ruling out associated medical issues associated with conditions, improving symptoms and functioning, informing future planning, and then also enhancing sort of understanding and self-acceptance was something that was really highly valued. And so one thing that one quote that I really liked on here was which one is it? Sorry, yeah, the quote at the bottom is from a father of a child who, really just wanted to understand sort of what the future sort of prognosis and trajectory was like, so that he could, in his role as a parent, sort of plan for the future and make necessary caregiving and also financial accommodations to be able to support his child in the future. But interestingly, a number of people that I spoke with were really sort of unable or unwilling to make trade-offs. And so, many participants mentioned that all of the outcomes that they received or expected to receive were important to them, with one participant mentioning that this was sort of like a whole package, with each little impact having its own moments at various points throughout their life. And one participant was also influenced by his reflections on sort of what he thought to be more important versus what he expected his wife would feel would be more important, and sort of then contrasting sort of personal reflections on outcomes and then from a familial sense as well. So these findings are part of a broader program of work, as I mentioned, where I'm aiming to develop a set of recommendations to support researchers, policymakers, and reimbursement bodies in really understanding how to measure outcomes in this context. And my particular interest is in the context of health economics and health technology assessment decisions. So there's a sort of a standard suite of outcome measurement instruments that we use in health economics, and my other work is sort of testing to what extent these capture the outcomes that are important to people and also can sort of detect changes in the things that are important to people. So yeah, really aiming to help people with their outcome measurement instrument selection decisions, have an improved understanding of where sort of these instruments may fall short, and then also improved interpretation of evidence generated using these if they are continued with. So before I like to conclude, I'd just like to acknowledge the contributions of all my wonderful supervisors and my funders, and also some special mentions along the side, so particularly to the GMS colleagues that I was very fortunate to work with. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.